9:11 a.m. local time. Open waters north of the Caribbean basin. The sea is calm, almost deceptively so. Visibility is excellent. The sky is clear, the horizon clean and uninterrupted. On the bridge of the U.S. Navy ship, the watch routine unfolds exactly as it should. Radar sweeps cycle. Navigation data updates. Merchant vessels appear as predictable blips, following established shipping lanes with no surprises. Then, within seconds, the pattern breaks. 8 new surface contacts populate the radar display nearly at once. Not staggered, not drifting in from different sectors. They appear together, spaced deliberately, holding similar speeds and converging angles. The radar operator leans forward, fingers hovering over the controls as the display zooms in. No AIS signals, no identification pings, no civilian profiles. 8 vessels. Silent. The officer of the deck studies the screen. Fishing boats don't move like this. Commercial traffic doesn't arrive in coordinated clusters. Even routine patrols announce themselves. These contacts do none of that. Their spacing suggests planning. Their speed suggests intent. Mark and track. The order comes quietly. By 9:13 a.m., the contacts are logged and classified. Small military hulls based on radar return and maneuvering behavior. Not major combatants, but unmistakably naval. Patrol-class silhouettes. Their formation isn't tight enough to be ceremonial, but it's far too precise to be accidental. Out on deck, nothing appears unusual. The sea remains glassy. No visible smoke trails, no sudden turns. To an untrained eye, this would look like an ordinary transit through international waters. Inside the ship, however, the atmosphere changes, not with alarm, but with concentration. Long-range optics are brought online. The camera feed confirms what radar already suggested. Gray hulls, angular superstructures, naval paint schemes, Venezuelan warships, 8 of them, approaching from multiple bearings. They aren't rushing. They aren't drifting. They're closing distance at a controlled, deliberate pace. What stands out most isn't their movement. It's their silence. At sea, silence is a choice. Standard maritime encounters involve communication, radio hails, bridge-to-bridge contact, signals that establish intent. When none of that happens, intent must be inferred from motion alone. And motion, in this case, tells a careful story. At 9:15 a.m., the first hail is transmitted on open maritime frequencies. Clear, professional, non-confrontational. It identifies the U.S. Navy vessel and states position in international waters. There is no response. A second hail follows moments later, repeated calmly, this time in both English and Spanish. Again, nothing. The Venezuelan ships maintain course. On the tactical displays, analysts begin calculating closest points of approach. If current headings hold, several vessels will pass well inside accepted safety margins, close enough to apply pressure, close enough to force interpretation, close enough that intent becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't random traffic. This isn't coincidence. At 9:18 a.m., one of the Venezuelan vessels makes a subtle adjustment, just a few degrees to port. Barely noticeable visually, but unmistakable on radar. The new heading places it on a tighter intercept line with the U.S. ship's projected path. Not aggressive enough to justify escalation, not innocent enough to dismiss. The captain is briefed with precision. 8 warships, no identification signals, no response to hails, one maneuvering closer, all actions logged, all sensors recording, rules of engagement unchanged. Maintain course, the captain orders. Continue documentation. The ship does not turn away. It does not speed up. It does not slow down. Professional restraint at sea is not hesitation. It is control. And control is power. By 9:21 a.m., the geometry of the encounter becomes unmistakable. What initially looked scattered now resolves into something deliberate. Angles tighten. Spacing makes sense. The Venezuelan vessels are no longer merely approaching. They are positioning. An encirclement doesn't need to close completely to send a message. It only needs to be close enough. And at this moment, that message is being delivered. Quietly, deliberately, and without a single word spoken. Something began when those 8 contacts appeared on radar. What happens next will determine how far this confrontation goes, the shape of pressure. By 9:26 a.m., the situation has matured beyond ambiguity. On the radar display, the 8 Venezuelan warships are no longer approaching on loosely parallel tracks. One by one, their headings adjust, small corrections, measured in degrees, executed with discipline. Viewed imaginally, each maneuver looks insignificant. Viewed together, they form a pattern that leaves little room for doubt. The U.S. Navy ship now sits at the center of a tightening geometry. 2 Venezuelan vessels slide outward to starboard, holding distance but matching speed. 3 more ease into position off the port quarter, their spacing almost perfectly uniform. The remaining ships lag just far enough astern to provide depth, creating layers rather than a single line. It isn't a full encirclement. It doesn't need to be. At sea, distance is language, and this language is becoming unmistakably deliberate. Inside the Combat Information Center, analysts continuously update closest point of approach calculations. The numbers refresh every few seconds. Each refresh brings slightly worse projections. If no one alters course, at least 2 Venezuelan ships will pass inside 2 nautical miles. That distance still sits within legal boundaries, but it presses hard against accepted norms. 2 nautical miles isn't danger space, it's decision space. At 9:28 a.m., another hail is transmitted. Calm, firm, professional. It identifies the U.S. vessel, reaffirms lawful navigation in international waters, and requests intentions. The transmission is clean, audible, and unmistakable. There is still no response. That silence now feels intentional rather than accidental. Long-range cameras zoom further. The image sharpens enough to reveal activity on the Venezuelan decks. Crew members are visible along railings and forward sections. Helmets on. Body language alert. No weapons actively manned, no overtly hostile posture, but no casual movement either. This is a watchful stance, a ready stance. Inside the CIC, quiet observations are spoken aloud for the record. Formation integrity is strong. Spacing is consistent. Speed changes are synchronized. This is not an uncoordinated patrol wandering too close. At 9:31 a.m., a subtle shift occurs. One Venezuelan ship increases speed by roughly 2 knots. On paper, it's trivial. In context, it's a signal. The vessel edges ahead of the others, positioning itself closer to the U.S. ship's projected bow path. The arc tightens further. Still, the U.S. ship holds steady. Turning now could be interpreted as yielding. Slowing could suggest uncertainty. Accelerating could escalate the encounter. The safest course, paradoxically, is predictability. Hold course, hold speed, the captain reiterates. Professional restraint is not passive, it is calculated. At 9:34 a.m., electronic sensors register the first active emissions. Low-power surface search radar pulses from one of the Venezuelan vessels. Not fire control, not a targeting lock. But no longer passive observation either. They are painting the ship. Every emission is logged, frequencies noted, power levels measured, durations time-stamped. Nothing dramatic happens, but the cumulative picture is growing heavier. This is controlled friction, carefully executed below the threshold that would justify escalation. From the bridge wing, binoculars confirm what sensors already suggest. Hull numbers are now readable. Flags are visible, fluttering clearly in the Caribbean wind. There is no confusion about nationality, no misunderstanding about jurisdiction. Both sides know exactly who they are facing. By 9:37 a.m., the formation stabilizes. 8 Venezuelan warships hold a loose semicircle, all within visual range. No vessel cuts across the U.S. ship's bow. No one violates collision regulations outright. The choreography is precise. Pressure without provocation. Intent without hostility. This is the gray zone. The captain receives an updated assessment. Closest contacts inside 2 nautical miles. Multiple coordinated maneuvers. Active radar emissions logged. No weapons manned. No hostile acts. Yet. The choice is simple and difficult. Escalate and risk turning posturing into confrontation. Withdraw and validate the pressure. Hold steady and force the other side to decide how far they're willing to go. The U.S. Navy ship holds its line. By 9:40 a.m., a boundary has been drawn. Not with words, but with motion. 8 Venezuelan warships have tested that boundary without crossing it. The silence remains unbroken. But the next move, whenever it comes, will not be accidental. It will be a choice. From pressure to provocation. At 9:44 a.m., the encounter takes a measurable turn. On the radar display, 2 Venezuelan warships begin to accelerate. The increase isn't abrupt. 3 knots at first, then 4. Smooth throttle changes, synchronized, unmistakable. Their headings adjust in unison, narrowing their angles toward the U.S. Navy ship's bow. This is no longer passive geometry. Inside the Combat Information Center, closest point of approach calculations refresh again. This time, the projections trigger caution indicators. One vessel is now expected to pass inside 1 nautical mile if neither ship alters course. That number matters. 1 nautical mile isn't collision distance, but it is confrontation distance. It's close enough that every rudder movement carries intent. Close enough that hesitation can be interpreted as weakness and steadiness as defiance. At 9:46 a.m., another radio hail is transmitted, firmer now, still professional, delivered clearly in English and Spanish. It states position, identifies the vessels involved, and warns that continued maneuvering is unsafe. There is still no reply. Instead, 1 Venezuelan ship alters course again, just a few degrees, but this time the adjustment cuts more directly across the U.S. ship's projected path. The maneuver is smooth, practiced, and undeniably deliberate. This is a test. On the bridge, the watch officers say little. Every change is logged. Cameras remain locked. Sensors continue to record. Nothing is missed, because nothing can be afforded to be missed. At 9:48 a.m., electronic sensors register a second active radar emission. Another Venezuelan vessel briefly switches from passive to active mode, sweeping the area with low-power pulses. Not a targeting lock, not a hostile act, but no longer neutral. They are pushing boundaries. Electronic warfare specialists capture the data automatically. Frequency bands, pulse patterns, durations. This is no longer just navigation data. It's evidence, proof of behavior if the encounter escalates or is reviewed later. Visually, The ships are now close enough that individual movements on deck are clear. Sailors reposition. A small group gathers near a forward gun mount on one vessel. The weapon remains unmanned, but the posture is unmistakable. This isn't about firing. It's about being seen. Pressure without contact. Intent without action. At 9:50 a.m., the captain calls senior watch officers to the bridge. The assessment is concise and factual. 8 Venezuelan warships, 2 maneuvering aggressively, multiple active radar emissions, no communication, no weapons manned. The rules of engagement remain unchanged. There is still no justification for force, but there is also no obligation to yield. Prepare aviation option, the captain orders. The words travel quietly through the ship. There are no alarms, no raised voices. Below deck, the flight crew moves with calm efficiency. This is not an emergency scramble. It's a calculated escalation of presence. An aircraft changes the equation without firing a shot. At 9:53 a.m., the most forward Venezuelan ship increases speed again. Its wake lengthens, white water slicing sharply through the blue surface. The CPA drops further, now well under 1 nautical mile. Inside the CIC, a watchstander states it plainly for the log. Contact maneuvering with intent. That phrase carries weight. It is not a declaration of hostility, but it marks the final step before escalation protocols are triggered. On the bridge, the captain watches through binoculars. He gives the opposing crew every opportunity to reconsider. Seconds pass. No course correction comes. At 9:55 a.m., the decision is made. Launch the helicopter. The order is calm, final. This is the line, not a weapon, not a threat, but a presence that cannot be ignored. As the ship maintains course and speed, the flight deck comes alive. Rotors begin to spin, breaking the Caribbean silence for the first time since the encounter began. The sound carries across the water, reaching every vessel in the Venezuelan formation. Words have failed. Geometry has spoken. Now, the message moves to the air. The moment the air changes everything. At 9:57 a.m., the helicopter lifts cleanly off the flight deck. Its rotors cut through the still Caribbean air, sending ripples across the water below. The sound travels far, farther than any radio hail, and every ship in the Venezuelan formation hears it immediately. This is not an emergency launch. There is no frantic movement on deck, no shouted commands. Everything unfolds with practiced precision. Control is the message. The aircraft climbs to a low operational altitude and moves forward, angling toward the tightening arc of Venezuelan warships. From the bridge, the captain watches in silence. The U.S. Navy ship holds steady. Same heading, same speed. Nothing about its posture suggests retreat. The message is subtle but unmistakable. We are not moving. You are. By 9:59 a.m., the helicopter crosses the forward boundary of the Venezuelan formation. Not directly overhead. Not aggressively. It passes offset, wide enough to avoid provocation, but close enough to command attention. Sensors are already active. Electro-optical systems stabilize on hull numbers, deck crews, bridge windows. Video streams back to the ship in real time, geo-referenced and time-stamped. This is not intimidation. This is documentation. Inside the aircraft, the crew works in silence. The pilot holds a steady line. The sensor operator calls out bearings and distances. Every adjustment made by the Venezuelan ships is captured and recorded. At 10:01 a.m., the helicopter slows and settles into a controlled orbit near the most aggressive vessel, the one that closed inside a mile. the one that altered course first. From this vantage point, the shift in posture becomes obvious. On the Venezuelan deck, crew members look up. Some shield their eyes from the sun. Others point. A few move back toward the superstructure. The helicopter's presence removes ambiguity. Ships can play geometry games. Aircraft eliminate uncertainty. A calm broadcast goes out from the helicopter. Neutral tone, precise phrasing. This is a United States Navy aircraft. You are operating unsafely in international waters. Alter course immediately. The message is repeated slowly, clearly, in Spanish. For the first time since the encounter began, there is visible hesitation. At 10:03 a.m., the nearest Venezuelan ship reduces speed. Not dramatically, but enough to shorten its wake. The closest point of approach widens slightly. Another vessel farther out on the arc begins to drift back, increasing range by fractions of a mile. Small movements, but unmistakable ones. The helicopter maintains its orbit. It does not chase. It does not hover directly overhead. Pressure is applied through presence, not pursuit. Cameras continue rolling. Every course change is captured. On the U.S. Navy ship, the CIC updates the bridge. Contact 1 reducing speed. Contact 3 increasing range. No further active radar emissions detected. The encirclement is loosening. At 10:06 a.m., a brief burst of radio chatter appears. Venezuelan naval call signs, internal coordination, not addressed to the U.S. ship. Repositioning orders. Quiet recalculation. The helicopter widens its orbit slightly, remaining clearly visible to the entire formation. Its silhouette hangs against the bright sky, unarmed but dominant. Everyone involved understands what it represents, not just a single aircraft, but the layered capability behind it. By 10:08 a.m., the most forward Venezuelan ship alters course. Just a few degrees. Enough to break the intercept line, enough to signal a decision. Others follow in sequence. The arc opens. Distances increase. No announcement is made. No declaration of withdrawal. None is necessary. At sea, movement speaks louder than words. At 10:10 a.m., the helicopter turns back toward the U.S. Navy ship. Rotors tilt. Speed increases slightly. The message has been delivered and received. From the bridge, the captain nods once. The turning point has passed. No weapons were fired. No voices were raised. But the balance of the encounter has shifted decisively. When pressure breaks. By 10:12 a.m., the encounter no longer feels balanced. The helicopter settles back onto the flight deck with smooth precision. Rotors slow. Deck crews secure the aircraft without urgency. To an outside observer, it looks routine, another launch and recovery under clear skies. But inside the ship, everyone understands what just occurred. Momentum has shifted. On the radar display, the Venezuelan formation begins to lose its shape. The tight arc that once pressed inward starts to stretch. One ship increases lateral distance, sliding outward instead of closing. Another falls back entirely, its speed dropping below the rest of the group. The most aggressive vessel, the one that closed inside a mile, now holds a steady heading that no longer threatens the U.S. ship's projected path. There is no apology, no explanation. None is expected. At sea, movement is communication. At 10:15 a.m., the captain orders a full status review. Analysts confirm what the visuals suggest. All contacts remain present, but their behavior has changed fundamentally. Passive sensors only. No active radar emissions. No coordinated maneuvers aimed at constraining movement. Observation has replaced pressure. The U.S. Navy ship does not alter course. It does not slow down. It does not accelerate to signal dominance. Instead, it continues exactly as before. Steady speed, steady heading, disciplined posture. Changing now would suggest the pressure mattered. It didn't. From the bridge wing, the Venezuelan warships remain visible, but the distance is growing. Their wakes angle away instead of inward. The formation that once felt deliberate now looks fragmented. Individual vessels making individual decisions. At 10:18 a.m., one ship breaks farther south. Another drifts west. The remaining vessels trail behind at increasing range, maintaining visibility without proximity. The encirclement has dissolved. Inside the Combat Information Center, timelines are finalized. Radar tracks are saved, video files archived, electronic emissions cataloged. Every maneuver, every heading change, every moment of silence preserved with timestamps and coordinates. This isn't just a report. It's a record. Encounters like this rarely end with explosions. They end with documentation. By 10:22 a.m., the final update reaches the bridge. No contacts maneuvering with intent. No active sensors. No safety violations in progress. Maintain normal operations, the captain orders. That's it. No victory announcement. No dramatic conclusion. Just a ship continuing its lawful transit through international waters. The Venezuelan warships fade slowly into the distance, their presence reduced to shrinking radar returns and quiet wakes dissolving into blue water. What began as coordinated pressure ends as disengagement, unspoken, uncelebrated, but unmistakable. This is how modern naval confrontations unfold, not with gunfire, but with calculation, not with shouting, but with restraint, not with headlines, but with control. 8 warships attempted to test resolve without firing a shot. They measured distance, silence, and coordination. They pushed until the boundary became clear, and stopped when crossing it would have been too costly. What happened here was not weakness. It was dominance expressed quietly. The U.S. Navy did not need to outgun its counterpart. It only needed to demonstrate discipline, patience, and the capability to escalate without losing control. That combination is harder to challenge than firepower alone. As calm returns to the Caribbean, the lesson remains. In international waters, control does not belong to the loudest voice or the closest hull. It belongs to the side that understands when to hold steady and when to make the other side blink without ever pulling the trigger. And this time, that's exactly what happened.